A child was born beneath the black sky of a forgotten moon, no records, no names, no stars to witness it. The wind screamed outside the hut of rusted metal, but inside everything was still. No one cried, not the mother, not the child, because even in her first breath, she knew not to make a sound. The world did not offer mercy. Its surface was cracked by old mining scars, its air thick with poisonous ash that turned lungs cold before the age of 10. Survivors here didn't live. They endured, and the Force didn't speak. It whispered. They called it Ruuma, a slave camp turned settlement after the Outer Rim mining guilds fled and left their workers behind. The factories were dead. The dust never settled. And in the silent corners of that place, something waited. Not a presence, not a being, just a void, heavy, patient, and unkind. The girl was born into it, not as a miracle, not as a prophecy, just a child with 2 wide eyes and a heartbeat that didn't match the others. The healers said she was cold. Not from illness but from the inside. Like her blood didn't burn the way it should. She didn't smile. She didn't scream. She just watched. Her mother, a woman once taken from Corellia as a child, whispered lullabies in a language she no longer remembered. Her hands trembled when she held the baby. Not from fear, but because she sensed something she couldn't name. Other children cried at night. She didn't. Other children begged for warmth. She sat in the dark. Other children fought over scraps. She never needed to. Because from the beginning, they were afraid of her. Not because she was cruel, but because the air changed when she entered a room. Because the floorboards groaned when she passed. Because machines that hadn't worked in years flickered to life when she stared too long. And when she looked at you, really looked at you, it felt like being studied by something older than a child, older than this world. The elders spoke of old Jedi raids, long ago, when Force users had come to cleanse slave camps from Sith corruption. They spoke of it like a ghost story. But none came anymore, not here. Not to this place. The Republic didn't know it still existed. The Jedi had forgotten. Or maybe they had chosen to. So when the girl turned 5, and her mother died in the ash storms, no one came to take her. She sat beside the body for 3 days. No tears, no burial, just silence. Some said they saw shadows around her that night. Some said the storm split in half, just for a moment, leaving a perfect corridor of clear sky above the ruins. But she never spoke of it. She never spoke at all. And when the miners finally found her, wrapped in her mother's old cloak, she didn't resist. She walked with them, alone, head down, eyes open. They would place her in the lower tunnels with the other orphans, to work, to rot, to forget. But this child didn't forget, because silence was not her prison. It was her home. And in that silence, something else was listening too. The tunnels beneath Ruuma were older than anyone remembered. They weren't meant for children. The beams groaned from rust. The lights flickered and died. The floor was wet with rot, and the walls hissed when touched. But this is where the unwanted were sent. They called it the crawl. No one cried down there, not because they didn't want to, but because the sound didn't carry. Voices would vanish the moment they rose. Some said the darkness swallowed them. Others said it listened too closely. No one knew for sure. That's where the girl lived now. She didn't speak. Not to the other children. Not to the guards. Not to herself. She only listened. To the scratching in the walls. The grinding of old pipes. The breath of the mine shallow, uneven, like it hated being awake. Each morning, the children would be dragged into the lower shafts to sort through ore that had already been picked clean decades ago. They weren't expected to succeed, just to stay busy, just to disappear one day and be replaced by others. She didn't disappear. She learned the patterns. Where the guards walked, when the steam vents released poison, which tunnels echoed sound, and which ones didn't. And beneath it all, she felt something. Not a presence, not the force. Something deeper, a hunger. It lived in the lowest sublevels, where the miners refused to go, where metal bent without heat and screams never echoed back. She hadn't seen it, but she had heard it, not through her ears, through the cracks in her bones, through the cold in her spine, through the tremble of water when it pooled around her ankles. Others said it was just the mind settling, but she knew better. One night, a boy tried to take her food. He was older, stronger, and cruel in the way starving people become. She didn't fight, she just stared at him. He froze. His hands wouldn't move. His lips began to bleed. First a trickle, then a stream. His nose followed, then his ears. He collapsed without a scream, just like the silence had swallowed it before he could speak. The others ran, but she didn't. She stood over his body and tilted her head, as if listening for something deeper, a sound no one else could hear. And then she spoke. For the first time, just 3 words. He's still here. No one knew what she meant. No one ever asked. They stopped touching her after that, stopped stealing from her, stopped looking her in the eyes. They gave her the best corner of the crawl, the dry one, the warm one. Out of fear, out of respect, out of something older. She never smiled, never thanked them. Instead, she started drawing on the walls, with stone, with ash, with broken nails, symbols no one recognized, shapes that made the lights flicker and the air turn thick. Some said they were Sith sigils, others said they were from before the Sith. But she wasn't learning from books. There were no holocrons, no scrolls, nothing passed down. She was remembering things no child should. And when she closed her eyes at night, she didn't dream of escape. She didn't dream at all. She just listened. Down, further, into the floor, into the thing beneath the floor. Because the hunger wasn't coming for her. It was calling her home. The ash storms came without warning. No sirens, no shelter, just wind, black and howling, like the sky itself was breaking apart. On Ruuma, storms meant death. Not from the air or the cold, but from the collapse that always followed. Buildings fell, people vanished, and when the silence returned, fewer voices remained. It was during one of these storms that the mine cracked open. The upper shafts fell first. Screams echoed down the tunnels, then stopped too soon. Ceiling beams snapped. Fire poured through old gas lines. The guards ran. The children scattered. And the girl stood still. She watched the ceiling tremble, watched the walls split, but she didn't move. She waited. And when the tunnel collapsed above her, the rocks did not touch her. They froze, hung in the air, then crumbled to dust before hitting the ground. She blinked, once, slowly, and then she walked deeper into the mine. Not to survive, but to find it. The hunger, the thing that had been whispering since the day her mother died. No one saw her go. No one tried to stop her. Those who lived spoke of her like a ghost, the girl who walked into the storm and vanished without a sound. She descended through cracks in the earth that shouldn't have existed, down rusted ladders, through pools of black water, past corpses crushed beneath forgotten machinery. And when she reached the bottom, there was no bottom. just a hole. Not carved, not mined, ripped. A wound in the planet. A space where gravity bent, and the force fell silent. She stood at the edge, and for the first time, she wept. Not from pain, from recognition. The hunger wasn't a beast, it wasn't a Sith, it wasn't even alive. It was grief, endless, ancient, starving. It reached for her, not with hands, but memory. It showed her flashes of battles long buried, of Jedi screaming into fire, of Sith tearing each other apart in silence, of mothers holding dead children, of children burying nameless mothers. She fell to her knees, but she did not look away, and slowly, the memory became hers. Not like a vision, like a scar. When the storm passed, the surface camps were gone. The tunnels were sealed. The mine was declared dead. No rescue ships came, no records remained. But deep below, the girl was still alive. Changed. She did not emerge for days, maybe weeks. And when she did, she was not a child. She was a survivor. Her face was cold, her hands steady, her steps silent. She walked through the ruins of the slave camp, and the wind parted for her. A boy called her name, but she didn't turn, because that name no longer belonged to her. She was not the girl born in silence. She was the silence, the echo of a wound that would never close. And somewhere far above, in the forgotten stars, the force rippled. Not in warning, in mourning, because something was waking. Not strong, not bright. Something quiet, something cold, and it remembered everything. When the storms finally ended, Ruuma was not the same world. Most of the camps were buried beneath the ash. The old slave quarters had fallen into the earth, and the few who survived walked as if haunted by something they could not name. They whispered of shadows moving without light, of voices echoing inside metal walls, of a coldness that lingered long after the fires died. But the girl who returned from the depths did not listen to their fear. She listened to something else. The hunger that once pulled at her bones was quiet now, not gone, watching, like a wound that had learned to wait. She moved through the shattered settlements without speaking. She stepped around bodies with gentle precision, as if memorizing the shape of their final rest. And when she passed the old healers, the ones who had whispered prayers over her as an infant, they bowed their heads without knowing why. Because the air around her had changed. It felt heavier, older, and still. At night, she sat near the edge of the broken mining pit and looked into the darkness. Other children avoided that place. They feared what they believed still lived down there. But she didn't fear it. She had walked its depths and survived. The dark had not claimed her. Instead, it had spoken to her. Not in words, in memory, in patterns of grief that repeated like distant thunder. She heard those echoes even now faint, scattered, drifting through the force like fragments of forgotten lives. A Jedi Master calling out for an apprentice who never returned. A Sith Lord begging the Force to take his pain. A soldier whispering a final promise to someone he loved and left behind. None of these voices were real. None belonged to living beings. They were remnants, emotions burned so deeply into the past that they refused to fade. She listened to them the way others listened to stories. And slowly, she began to understand. Ruuma was not cursed. It was not haunted. It was wounded. Long ago, something had torn through this place. A battle, a sacrifice, a failure the galaxy had forgotten. But the Force had not. It carried that moment like a scar, and scars echo. They echo for centuries. She felt that echo inside herself. and when she breathed, it breathed with her. One evening, as the sky dimmed to a pale silver, she heard something new, a sound she had never sensed before. Not hunger, not memory, purpose, a direction, a pull. Like the force itself was turning its gaze toward her for the first time. The wind shifted, ash swirled at her feet, and the darkness below seemed to quiet, waiting. She stood. She did not know the name of the place calling her. She did not know its purpose or its danger. She only knew that the life she had lived until now, the crawl, the tunnels, the storms, was not the shape of her future. She was meant to leave Ruuma, not to seek hope, to seek truth, and truth in the galaxy was rarely kind. The survivors watched her walk toward the horizon, a small figure wrapped in a torn cloak, pale against the field of black dust. None followed. None called her back. They felt something around her, the shifting presence of a destiny they could not understand. As she stepped beyond the last broken fences, the whispers of the Force grew louder. Not voices, not commands, just a feeling, a quiet warning, a quiet welcome, and a quiet promise that everything she had endured until now was only the beginning. They came after the second storm, not in ships, not in armor, just shadows at the edge of the wind, figures in robes too old for this age, faces hidden beneath cloth and iron, breathing not through lungs but ritual. The survivors of Ruuma called them monks. Some thought they were Jedi, others thought they were the ones who had caused the mines to fall. But no one stopped them. No one asked questions, because when they walked through the camps, the ash didn't touch them, and when they reached the girl, they knelt, not in worship, in recognition. She was sitting by the edge of the great pit again, where the hunger had once called to her, where the Force had opened like a wound. Her eyes were half closed, her hands still. She didn't turn when they approached. She didn't speak, but she felt them, before they arrived, before they were even close. Not through the Force, through silence. They didn't need to ask who she was. They had heard the stories of the child who survived the collapse, of the blood that never touched her skin, of the bodies that broke when she looked at them. They had come because of those stories. But what they found was not power, not anger, not rage. They found something worse, stillness. And that's what convinced them. They did not drag her away. She walked with them, eyes lowered, steps quiet. No words passed between them. But the ash shifted behind their path, as if the earth itself wanted to forget they had ever been there. They did not return to a ship. There was no ship. They walked to a place even the maps had stopped naming, a ruin buried beneath obsidian cliffs, where once a Sith temple had stood before the great hyperspace war burned it from memory. It had no name now, only echoes. That's where they took her. The entrance was a crack in the mountain. The walls were scarred with symbols older than the Republic. The air was dry, not from heat, from death. No life could grow here. No light could stay. Even the Force felt thin, like something had bled it dry. They brought her inside. They placed her in a chamber with no door, no fire, no food. She said nothing. She did not sleep. And when the walls began to whisper, she didn't scream, because the silence had already taught her how to listen. They watched her for days, studied her movements, waited for signs of weakness. She gave them nothing, no pleading, no resistance, no hunger, just stillness. On the seventh day, the high voice came. He was older than any of them, but not by years, by scars. His face was a map of burned flesh and jagged metal. his eyes long since removed, replaced with lenses that glowed faint red in the dark. He stepped into her chamber. She did not rise. But when he spoke, she answered. Not with words, with breath. The room shifted, not from the force, from something deeper, something colder. The high voice knelt, and in the old tongue of the Sith, he said, "She does not resist the wound, she is the wound." From that day forward, they began her trials. And for the first time since the mine collapsed, she felt something close to fear. Not of death, of memory. The rituals did not begin with fire. They began with silence. The cultists gathered in a circle carved from stone. Torches burned without smoke, their flames bending inward as if pulled by something at the center. The girl stood alone within that ring, her bare feet pressed against symbols that pulsed faint red beneath the dust. The temple walls breathed as if alive. Metal scraped somewhere deeper in the ruins, echoing like dragging chains. The high voice watched from above, leaning on a staff that had once belonged to a fallen Sith Lord. He did not speak. He only listened, as if the darkness itself needed space to wake. The first ritual was simple. Endure. They cut her palms with a blade forged from ore mined on Ruuma centuries before she was born. The metal hummed when it touched her skin. The pain did not make her scream. It made her eyes sharpen, as though she recognized the wound, as though it was familiar. The cultists murmured among themselves. Children usually broke by the third cut. Some cried, some collapsed, some lost their minds. But she simply watched the blood fall, drop by drop, as if learning something from the way it hit the floor. The second ritual was harder. Remember, they bound her hands with heated chains and lowered her into a pit where the air shimmered with trapped suffering. The temple had seen centuries of Sith experiments, each one leaving a scar within the Force. Here, those scars clung to the walls like trapped ghosts. Cries from long-dead acolytes echoed softly, pleas for mercy, desperate promises. Weak voices calling for masters who would never return. Most who entered this pit felt their sanity stretch thin. She entered and felt nothing break. Instead, she listened to the fear, to the regret, to the fragments of Sith who had perished in this place. And slowly, those echoes began to change shape. They sharpened, dripped together, formed something almost like meaning. The high voice noticed. His lenses brightened as he whispered to the others. She hears what we cannot. The third ritual was the one meant to kill her. Burn. They painted her skin with oils taken from old Sith funerary rites. The mixture smelled of rust and cold metal. Then they ignited it, letting the flames run across her like water. Heat rolled through the chamber. The cultists stepped back, unable to bear it. But she did not burn. Her skin blistered, yes. Her breath faltered. Her knees shook. But the fire didn't take her. It recoiled, as though something inside her rejected it not with power, but with absence, a hollow, a void, as if the flames found no place to anchor themselves. The high voice leaned forward, his scarred fingers trembling. Not resistance, he whispered. Reflection. When the fire finally died, she stood trembling but alive. Her eyes were darker now. Not from smoke, from understanding. Something inside her had opened a crack, thin and silent. Not a gift. A wound, and through it, she sensed something deeper than the cultists' chants, deeper than the temple's old scars. A whisper. Soft, cold, patient. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. It seeped into her bones like memory, into her breath like frost, into her thoughts like a shadow she had always known. The rituals had not broken her. They had revealed her. She was not the child they had taken. She was the silence that survived. And now, the silence was listening back. She didn't know when the temple began to change. The stone halls always whispered, but now the whispers followed her. They no longer echoed, they lingered, like breath against her skin, like memory refusing to fade. The cultists began to avoid her. They didn't say it aloud, but their movements gave them away. They no longer made eye contact. They no longer offered food by hand. Even the high voice, once fascinated, now watched her with caution instead of reverence. Because something was happening inside her, and none of them could explain it. She had passed the rituals, endured the flame, survived the pit. She had heard the voices, and she had not broken. But the real change came in silence. In dreams she didn't choose, in thoughts that weren't hers. It began with sound, a hum in the walls, low, constant, not mechanical, not natural. It felt alive. But more than that, it felt aware. It spoke to her, not in language, in pattern, in rhythm. She began repeating phrases in the old Sith tongue that no one had taught her. She traced markings in the dust that hadn't been seen since the days of Naga Sado. She recited codes that predated the Brotherhood of Darkness, codes buried in collapsed tombs, lost to time. And one night, she screamed, not from pain, from clarity, because the whisper had become a voice, and it showed her everything. The fracture. She saw it not in the temple, not in the world, but in the force itself, like a seam torn open, a place where time didn't flow and light didn't reach, a scar too deep to heal, a wound no Jedi could cleanse, no Sith could control. It had been there for thousands of years, and she was standing at its edge. No one else felt it, not the acolytes, not the high voice, but she could see where the force bled thin, where the old battles had burned holes into reality, where the weight of countless deaths had warped the very breath of the galaxy. It wasn't a place, it was a state of being, and now, it was part of her. She stopped eating, not from rebellion, from transformation. She no longer needed warmth, no longer noticed when her skin cracked from the temple's dry air. Her body was changing not into something stronger, into something emptier. The cultists sent another child to speak with her, a boy, no older than she had been when taken from Ruuma. His hands shook when he entered. He tried to offer her water. She touched his fingers, just briefly, and he collapsed. The high voice found her kneeling beside him, her head tilted, listening to the final echo of the boy's thoughts as they drifted into the force. She didn't cry, she didn't explain. She only whispered one word. Fractured. After that, they sealed her in a deeper chamber. A place even they feared. A vault built beneath the temple, designed to contain Sith artifacts too unstable to destroy. Masks, daggers, holocrons that whispered madness, cursed armor etched with blood. They left her there, alone, but she wasn't alone, because the fracture had followed her. Or maybe, she had become it. In that darkness, something ancient stirred, something that had been waiting for a voice, for a vessel, not to possess, not to control, to continue. Because the Sith believed they had uncovered the truth of the dark side. But they had only found its shadow. And now, the shadow had found her. The vault was not meant for life. Its walls were lined with metal that dimmed the force. Its ceiling dripped with condensation, falling in slow beads that echoed like distant footsteps. Every artifact inside seemed to hum with its own quiet torment. Masks carved by hands long dead, talismans cracked from forgotten battles, holocrons wrapped in chains so they would not open on their own. The acolytes believed this place could contain her. They were wrong. The moment they sealed the door, the chamber shifted, not physically but in presence. The air grew dense, heavy, as though the force itself had inhaled and then refused to exhale again. She sat in the center of the room, knees drawn to her chest, eyes half open, and the voice came, not as a whisper this time, not as scattered memories, as intention, a slow pulse through the force, like the beating of a heart buried deep beneath the planet. It pulled at her, gentle at first, then stronger. She should have been afraid. Any other child would have screamed for help, but she only leaned forward, as if listening to a story she had always known. The voice had no shape, no gender, no past she could understand. It was not a Sith Lord reaching from death, not a Jedi spirit lingering in regret, not a creature born from shadows. It was the wound itself, a place where thousands of deaths had pooled together, a point where failures, losses, betrayals, and ancient battles had carved a hole in the force so deep that even time seemed to avoid it. She had touched that wound once, in the mine, but now she felt its depth, its loneliness. Because the wound was not hungry for blood, it was hungry for memory. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be understood. It wanted a voice. And she became that voice. Images flooded her mind. Not visions, impressions. Sith scholars kneeling before a holocron that shattered their sanity. Jedi masters sealing away relics too dangerous to destroy. Warriors dying in silence, their last breath still echoing in the cracks of the temple walls. She absorbed these emotions as if they belonged to her, each one a thread weaving into her thoughts. Her heartbeat slowed, her breath deepened, and for the first time, she spoke back. "What do you want?" The words cracked the quiet like lightning. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the chained holocrons pulsed with red light, reacting to her presence. The temperature dropped. The metal bindings creaked as though resisting something unseen. The voice did not answer with language. It answered by giving her clarity. A path, a purpose, a truth the Sith had forgotten. That the dark side was not only rage and power, it was loss. And loss, when left to rot, becomes hunger. And hunger, when starved long enough, becomes a will of its own. The wound carried that will, and now so did she. Hours passed, or days. Time dissolved in the vault's silence. When the cultists finally opened the chamber to retrieve her, the torches outside flickered and died. Their breath fogged in the cold. The high voice stepped forward, sensing something he had no words for. She stood in the center of the room, unbound, unharmed, unchanged in body, and yet nothing like the child they had taken. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and the high voice stumbled back, because the force around her didn't feel like the dark side. It felt like something deeper, something quieter, something wrong. The wound had found its vessel, and Darth Shaar, though she did not yet bear the name, had taken her first step toward becoming the whisper the galaxy would one day fear. She was 16 when the voices stopped. Not the ones in her mind, those had never spoken with language. They breathed, they pulsed, they guided. But now, even they had fallen silent. The cultists didn't notice. They still whispered their rites, still lit their torches in spirals, still read from scrolls half-rotted by time. They believed she was progressing, that her silence meant acceptance, that her stillness meant obedience. But the silence wasn't peace. It was a turning. The fracture within her had grown, not louder, wider. She no longer heard the pain of others as echoes. She felt it before they did. She knew when someone would break, knew what memory they'd beg for as they died, knew which fear they'd reach for as they clung to life. And she didn't feel pity. She felt clarity. That was the difference. Her body bore the scars of the rituals, lines across her arms, burn marks across her back, a missing tooth from the night they had tested her with lightning. But her eyes never changed, always steady, always quiet. And that's what made them fear her. They had stopped using her name, not out of respect, because they no longer knew what to call her. The high voice had begun sending her alone into the catacombs, past the vaults where the last remnants of the ancient Sith had been sealed. They told her it was training, that she was communing with history. But in truth, they were watching, hoping the dark would consume her, hoping the power would kill her before it made her something they couldn't control. But she returned each time, calmer, colder, more distant, until one night she did not return. Not immediately. She stayed beneath the temple for 3 days. No one dared follow. When she rose from the depths again, her robes were torn, her hands were bloodied, and her eyes had changed. They weren't red like the Sith. They weren't yellow with hatred. They were gray, empty, like smoke had filled her skull and left nothing behind. She walked past the acolytes without speaking, past the guards, up the broken staircase that led to the outer air. And for the first time in years, she looked at the stars. Not with wonder, with understanding. The Force had stopped speaking not because it had abandoned her, but because it had finished. There was nothing left to teach. What came next was choice, and she made it. She waited until the second moon rose, until the temple was asleep, until only the high voice remained in the sanctum, meditating before the tomb of the founder, the Sith Lord, whose name had been erased even from the holocrons. She entered without sound, and stood behind him. He didn't turn. He knew. She didn't raise her hand, didn't ignite a saber. She simply stepped forward and pressed her fingers to the back of his neck. The Force did the rest. His spine shattered like glass. His body collapsed forward. No pain, no scream, just silence. The others didn't understand what had happened until the fire began slow and deliberate, set in chambers where sacred scrolls were kept. No panic, no wild escape, just a quiet unraveling. By the time dawn reached the cliffs, the temple was gone. Smoke curled into the clouds. The mountain cracked where the vaults had once stood. The statues fell. The echo of the rituals faded. And the voices were silent. Because she had killed them. Not out of rage. Out of clarity. The temple burned through the night. Flames crawled along the stone like living things, reaching into holes where countless rituals had stained the floors. The fire did not roar. It whispered, quiet, steady, almost respectful, as if it understood what was happening. As if it knew this place was never meant to survive her. The acolytes tried to flee. Some ran toward the cliffs, others hid behind collapsed pillars. But none of them escaped her awareness. She felt their fear before they moved, felt their intentions before they formed. Their thoughts flickered like sparks along her skin, each one sharp, fragile, and exposed. She walked among them, not running, not hunting, just moving through the smoke, as if she were part of it. A young acolyte, the only one who had ever dared speak to her kindly, crawled across the floor, his robe torn, his face streaked with ash. He reached for her ankle and whispered her name, the old one she had been given before Ruuma swallowed her childhood. She stepped past him, not because she hated him, because she no longer recognized the word he said. The high voice had called her the wound, and he had been right. She carried something inside her now, something that did not bend for mercy or remembrance. It was not cruelty. It was understanding, a clean, cold certainty that some ties had to break so others could form. The boy's hand dropped. His voice faded in the smoke. She never looked back. Another acolyte, older and desperate, lifted a broken blade to defend himself. His hands shook so violently he could barely hold it. She didn't disarm him, she didn't strike. She simply looked into him through him, until his heart clenched inward like a fist. He collapsed without a touch. The force had obeyed her easily, too easily. The more she moved, the more she felt it shifting around her. Not like it did for the Sith or the Jedi, not bending through emotion or intention, but gathering, converging, gravitating toward her like dust toward gravity, as if it recognized something familiar within her silence. At the edge of the inner sanctum, one of the robed caretakers tried to speak. He begged her to stop. He told her the temple held knowledge older than the galaxy's wars, that she could be a master among them, that she only needed guidance. She listened to every word. Then she placed her hand on the wall beside him. The stone cracked, spider webbing outward, and the explosion of dust swallowed him whole. When the air cleared, he was gone, buried beneath the teachings he swore to protect. There was no anger in her face, only stillness, because anger requires attachment, and she had none left. The cult had taken her years ago, believing they would craft her into a weapon, a tool, a successor to their forgotten order. But what they created was something they could neither shape nor understand. She was not bound by their rituals. The wound inside her did not need their teachings. It needed freedom. And when the last surviving cultist fell, the temple seemed to sigh a long, final breath, escaping from a place that had held its pain for far too long. She walked to the center of the ruins and stood among the flames. The wind shifted around her, carrying the warmth away, leaving only the smell of stone and smoke. Her hair clung to her skin. Her robes fell apart in burnt threads. But she didn't feel the heat. She didn't feel anything. The blood of her masters, her caretakers, her captors stained the ground. Some would call it murder. Others would call it liberation. But for her, it was neither. It was necessity. The first death in her story. Not of a person, of a path. The fire burned for 2 full days. By the third, the smoke had vanished into the sky, leaving only scorched stone and silence behind. The temple was gone. The cultists were gone. The name they had forced on her was gone. She stood among the ashes, barefoot, cloaked in the wind, staring at the space where it had all once existed, not with grief, not with triumph, just stillness. The name they had used for her wasn't hers. It had been given to her after the mines, after the crawl, after they found her by the edge of the fracture. She had accepted it without question, not out of obedience but because it was easier than remembering the one before. Now, there was no name, just the memory of something broken. She didn't search for survivors. There were none. Not because she had hunted them, but because she had left nothing to return to. The collapse of the vaults had sealed the underground chambers. The catacombs had caved in. Even the mountain itself bore a new scar across its surface, like a wound split by the force. She moved through the rubble quietly. The old statues that once lined the path were shattered. Pieces of forgotten Sith lords' masks, fingers, crowns buried beneath blackened soil. One fragment caught her eye. A fragment of a stone face, carved without expression, its mouth slightly open as if trying to speak one last time. She didn't look away. She knelt. Not to mourn it, to study it, because even in death the Sith tried to teach. But what they left behind was not wisdom. It was warning, a caution buried beneath power, a whisper lost beneath centuries of pride. They believed strength came from domination, but domination was a language the galaxy eventually forgot. What lasted was pain, and pain was the only thing she understood. When she stood again, her feet disturbed a patch of scorched earth where the cultists had once etched their mark, a circle of interwoven sigils, carved into the ground to channel rituals. She erased it with one motion of her foot. Not out of anger, out of precision. There was no need for their symbols anymore. The Force had stopped speaking in their language, and it had started speaking in hers. She walked to the edge of the mountain path. The cliffs stretched wide, overlooking valleys of ash and stone. Somewhere in the distance, ships passed. Traders, mercenaries, Republic scouts. None of them would look twice at this ruin. None would ask what had happened. The galaxy was too large to notice when something old disappeared. She stood there for hours, not waiting, not planning, just listening. For what, she didn't know. Maybe for the voice that once whispered through the fracture. Maybe for the Force itself, to tell her what to do next. But nothing came. Only silence. And she realized something. The silence was not emptiness. It was permission to choose. No temple, no master, no rituals, no name. Just the wound still open, still breathing, now unshaped by any will but her own. She turned away from the cliff and began to walk, not toward anyone, not away from anything, just forward, through the ashes, through the wind, through the place where names had once lived. Because she didn't need a name now, she had purpose, and purpose is louder than any voice. She left the mountain with nothing, no weapon, no map, no destination, only the memory of what she had done and what she had become. The path down the slope was narrow, but she moved as if she had walked it before. Stones shifted beneath her feet. The wind carried dust from the scorched remains behind her, but she never looked back, not once. Because there was nothing there for her anymore. The Force was still quiet, but it wasn't absent. It moved differently now, not as a current to follow, or a power to bend, but as an echo, a mirror. It responded to her not with answers but with reflection. Every place she walked, she felt what had been lost there. Every person she passed, she felt what they hid beneath their breath. Pain, fear, loneliness, and she understood it all without speaking. In the outer villages, they saw her as a traveler, a drifter, a girl cloaked in silence who asked for nothing, paid for nothing, and yet was never turned away. Because something about her presence made people lower their voices, made them set aside their anger, made them remember the quiet things they tried to forget. She stayed in no place for more than a night. She never gave a name, and no one asked. In one village, a child reached out to her, curious. When their fingers touched, the child cried, not from hurt but from recognition. The mother pulled the child away, whispering apologies, but the girl only stepped aside and faded back into the road. She wasn't meant to be seen, only felt. By the time she reached the trade routes, her body had begun to change, not in shape, in weight, in gravity. The Force flowed around her now as if she were a center of it, as if something unseen orbited her steps. Animals grew still when she passed. Droids malfunctioned near her presence. Jedi relics on passing transports flickered when she came near. She didn't know what she was yet. Not Jedi, not Sith, but something between. Not a balance, a break, a wound, and wounds don't heal by force. They heal by choice. On a distant moon, she watched a mercenary beat a prisoner for refusing to reveal a name. She said nothing, did nothing. But when the mercenary looked at her, something in his expression changed. He dropped the weapon. His voice cracked. He ran. The prisoner thanked her, asked her who she was. She didn't answer, because even she didn't know anymore. She was no longer the girl from Ruuma, no longer the student of the cult, no longer the vessel of something ancient. She was the one who walked away. And the Force had followed. From a distance, the galaxy looked unchanged. Jedi still meditated in their temples. Sith still plotted in the shadows. Wars still burned between systems. But something subtle had shifted. A presence now moved across the stars without title, without banner, without home, changing nothing and everything, like the first breeze before a storm that no one sees until it's too late. She wasn't seeking revenge. She wasn't seeking power. She was seeking resonance. A place in the galaxy that felt like the silence inside her. A place where the wound in the Force wasn't hidden, where it was understood. And when she found it, if she found it, it would not be a battle. It would be a return, because the wound that once whispered to her was now part of her voice, and that voice had not finished speaking. Not yet. She arrived on Althos II during the second year of the Outer Rim sieges. The world was already dying, a planet of wetlands and ruined forests, stripped bare by decades of supply chain wars between the Republic and the Syndicates. It had no capital city, no defenses, just scattered outposts, and one medical camp funded by the Republic, guarded by clones, run by Jedi. She entered it with no records, no escort, no past. Just a name she hadn't used before. Dr. Sale. That was the mask. No one questioned it, not during war. Not when patients arrived in pieces. Not when medics collapsed from exhaustion and clone troopers bled out faster than Bacta could heal them. If you had hands that could help, you were welcomed. She wore white robes over her scarred body, kept her voice soft, moved slowly, spoke less than anyone else. She didn't use the Force, not openly, but the dying often quieted when she stood beside them. They didn't always survive, but they died with their eyes closed. And the others called that a gift. The Jedi at the camp were stretched thin. Padawans, not knights. Barely trained in medicine. Their masters gone to the front. They didn't see her as a threat. They saw her as a presence. One even said she reminded him of a seer, someone who heard the pain before it arrived. They weren't wrong. But what she heard wasn't pain. It was patterns. She studied war like a language, learned its rhythm. When supply ships arrived, how clone units rotated, what kind of wounds were common after orbital bombardment versus those caused by lightsaber duels. She asked nothing, but she listened to everything. She sat at the edge of med tents while Jedi whispered about battlefield losses. She helped clone commanders stabilize dying troopers and heard the words they mumbled in fevered dreams. She stood beside children who had lost their parents in the shelling and saw what hope looked like when it turned into silence. She never judged them, because this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about seeing clearly, and the more she watched, the clearer it became. No one here was winning. Republic victories came at the cost of towns. Jedi speeches brought no food. The wounded returned only to die slower. And beneath every noble oath, there was dread. No light, only delay. She wrote nothing, recorded nothing. Her mind held it all. The timelines, the strategies, the blind spots. She watched how the Jedi treated clone deaths with gratitude, but not grief. She watched clone medics perform miracles for people who called them numbers, and she saw how the Force flickered in the hands of healers who could not bear to feel anymore. There was no malice in it, just exhaustion, and that was the most dangerous part. She treated 25 patients in her first week. 18 died. Not one of them feared her. Not one of them asked where she came from. They only clutched her hand and stared into her eyes. And in those final moments, they all saw the same thing. Not comfort, not hatred. Something still, something deep, something old. When she returned to her quarters each night, she did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the fog crawl over the marshes, listening to the distant rumble of gunships. And every so often, she would whisper a single sentence into the dark. They think peace is still possible. But peace, like her name, was just another mask. And she had worn too many to forget what waited beneath. They brought in the wounded just before dawn. Not by ship, by hand, clone troopers, dragging their brothers through the mud. One carried 3 helmets in his arms, all empty, his own chestplate cracked down the middle, his face covered in soot. He didn't speak. None of them did. Just the breath of war, filling the tent like smoke that never cleared. She moved through the triage like a shadow, not commanding, just present. Jedi Knight Teron Vey led the healing team. Young, brave, already carrying more ghosts than victories. His robes were stained with old blood. His saber never left his hip. He still believed the Force could fix everything if only they tried harder. He trusted her, because she never questioned him. She just worked. She cleaned wounds that couldn't be closed, held hands that shook until they were still, whispered quiet things to dying men who forgot their names. She didn't use healing trance techniques. She didn't recite Jedi mantras. She just listened. And in that listening, she learned. One trooper named Drex bled from the spine. No back to left. No time. He asked if he was dying. She nodded. He asked if he'd be remembered. She didn't answer. Just rested her hand on his chest. He died looking at her. And in that final second, she felt something pass through her. Not the Force, not energy. Regret. So strong it cracked the silence inside her. Another clone, older, scarred, with half a face, begged her not to let the Jedi near him. He said he couldn't listen to their hope anymore. He said it made him feel small. She said nothing. Just placed a damp cloth over his eyes and stayed with him until his breath stopped. There was no lesson in it. No moral. Just truth. And the truth was this. They were dying for nothing. The war was not a clash of right and wrong. It was a slow unraveling, one that pulled at the seams of everyone it touched. Even the Jedi, especially the Jedi. She watched Teron Vey pour himself into healing a child from a burned village. The child died anyway. Later that night, he sat outside alone, face in his hands, whispering to the stars as if they could answer. She sat beside him, said nothing. He looked at her once and asked if she believed the Force would forgive them for losing. She said, "The Force doesn't forgive. It only remembers." He didn't speak again that night. After that, he stopped looking her in the eye. She moved quieter in the days that followed. The medics still saw her as a blessing. But some of the Jedi began to notice what she wasn't doing. She didn't meditate, didn't pray, didn't flinch at the sight of death, and never once did she smile. They couldn't explain it, but they felt it, and still, no one stopped her. Because death came faster than suspicion. Every day brought more wounded, more broken minds, more dying Jedi whispering names of Padawans they couldn't save. She stood over all of them, and she heard the same thing. again and again. Not fear of death, fear of failure. And somewhere beneath it all, beneath the pain, beneath the rot of war, she felt the fracture again, the one in the Force, the one that no one else seemed to notice. It pulsed through the cries of the dying, through the cracks in the Jedi's hope, through the war they still called noble. And as she listened, she felt herself slipping further into it, not away from who she was, but toward what she had always been. They moved the camp when the front shifted east. New swamps, new ruins, same war. Clone Command said it was progress. But the wounded came just as fast. And the Force felt worse. Not darker, just thinner. Like light stretched too far across a canvas. Like breath trying to fill lungs that no longer opened. Shaar could feel it in the soil, in the leaves that didn't grow back, in the water that no longer reflected the sky. She didn't say anything. She just watched. And beneath the silence, she felt the fracture. It pulsed, not from any one place, not a temple, not a relic. It bled through the very fabric of the war, not as an act, but as a consequence. It grew with every promise the Jedi couldn't keep, with every soldier who died nameless, with every time peace was whispered but never meant. It wasn't the Sith causing it. It wasn't even the Republic. It was loss, echoed endlessly, and it had found its way into everything. Even the Force. She began sensing things before they happened, not through visions, through absence. Through knowing when someone's name would be forgotten, when a hill would be taken, only to be abandoned, when a child would survive, but wish they hadn't. The Jedi couldn't feel it. Their focus was still on hope, on rebuilding, on winning, but they didn't see what she saw. She saw the places where the Force didn't flow anymore, where it had curdled, where it had broken. One afternoon, she stood over a soldier whose wounds weren't physical. His mind had gone blank, his heartbeat slow, his eyes wide but empty. He had survived 3 rotations, but whatever the war hadn't taken from his body, it had stolen from his soul. He didn't speak, didn't move. She reached into the Force carefully, not to heal, but to listen. And what she heard wasn't him. It was the wound. For a moment she saw it clearly. Not a place, a pattern. The same one she had first felt beneath the mines of Ruuma. The same one that had followed her through the vaults of the cult. The same silence that had pulled her from fire. Now, it was here too, spreading through the galaxy like frost beneath glass. A slow death the Jedi couldn't name. She looked around the medical camp, saw Jedi healers smiling through exhaustion, clone officers reciting reports like they still believed in them, civilians scrubbing blood from stretchers, hoping this would be the last time. And she understood something very simple. They weren't lying. They truly believed they were saving the galaxy. But the galaxy wasn't listening, because the fracture had already swallowed too much. It couldn't be undone with hope, only with clarity. And that clarity was becoming a part of her. Not like an idea, like a heartbeat. Each life she touched didn't make her more compassionate. It made her more aware of what war really was. A pattern of silence, a repetition of wounds. A machine that turned belief into dust. And she didn't hate it. She understood it. Because the wound wasn't evil. It was memory. The Force, remembering what people refused to. And she was part of that memory now. She stood beneath the half-broken flag of the Republic at sunset, the sky red with distant fire. And she whispered to no one, "You've already lost." Not out of cruelty, out of truth. The final turning came quietly. No explosion. No betrayal. Just a conversation. It happened beneath the roots of a fallen tree, where the camp's healers sometimes went to rest between shifts. The canopy blocked the smoke. The air was cooler, a place where war felt slightly less loud. Taranve was waiting for her there. He hadn't spoken much in the last week. His hands shook when he healed now. His voice was slower, his eyes heavier. He had seen too much and lost too many. But this time, when she approached, he looked up. "I know what you are," he said. She didn't flinch. "You're not a Jedi, not Republic. You don't sleep, you don't rest, you don't break." He didn't say it with anger. He said it with grief. She sat beside him, folding her hands in her lap. The breeze moved the grass, but not the air between them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he asked, "Why do you help us?" She could have lied, but lies were for people who needed to be believed. She didn't. So, she answered with the truth. "I'm not helping." He stared at her, and she continued, "I'm listening, watching, learning what peace looks like when it starts to rot." He said nothing. She turned to face him, her voice even softer now. "There is no light here, only delay. Every healing you give is another breath for a man who'll die next week. Every battle you win saves a child who will starve in the next camp. You know this." His eyes began to water. "Then why stay?" he asked. She looked up at the sky, because she knew this was the moment when words could finally tear the lie open. "Because truth lives in the dying," she said. "Not in the cause, not in the hope, in the eyes of the ones who know it's over, but breathe anyway." He stood, trembling. "You speak like a Sith." She shook her head. "I speak like a wound." He backed away. "You're dangerous." And she nodded. "Because I see clearly. And when you see clearly, you stop pretending." That night, Taranve left the camp. He didn't say goodbye. Some said he returned to the temple. Others said he fell in battle. She never searched, because she already knew what he saw when he looked at her. He didn't see a threat. He saw what was coming. After he left, the tone of the camp shifted. Jedi healers whispered when she passed. Some stopped assigning her to patients. A few clone commanders began watching her longer than usual. They felt it now, the quiet difference, the presence that no longer fit into their cause. She didn't resist. She didn't linger. One morning, before sunrise, she walked out of the camp and into the fog. No farewell, no trace, no sound. By midday, the command tent noticed she was missing. By evening, a Jedi Knight found a message carved into the root of the old tree. 7 words: "There is no light in this war." And beneath it, only delay. They didn't speak of her after that. The medics erased her name from the rosters. The Jedi filed no report, because they feared what it meant. Not that she had left, but that she had seen them, seen their desperation, seen the wound in the Force and named it. They buried her memory like they buried their dead, quietly, quickly, as if silence could fix what truth had broken. But in the years to come, when the war dragged on, when peace never came, when hope collapsed beneath the next fire, some of them would remember her, not as a healer, not as a Sith, but as something else, something that listened, something that never lied. Malachor was not a planet. It was a scar. The surface did not breathe. The sky did not move. The dust never rose, and the air tasted like something that had forgotten how to live. She felt it the moment her feet touched the ground. Not with fear, not with awe, but with recognition. This was not the first wound. It was just the largest one. Shaar did not come to Malachor to fight. She came to understand. The war had changed. Not the one fought with armies, but the one beneath. The quiet collapse of meaning. She had felt it for years now, crawling beneath Republic speeches and Sith ambition. It wasn't a darkness, it wasn't even evil. It was betrayal. Worn so long, it no longer needed a name. She followed the old maps, the ones etched into fragments of Sith lore and whispered through forgotten tombs. They warned against going near the surface. Not because of what was there, but because of what remained. Malachor hadn't healed. It had memorized the pain. The great wound carved by the ancient superweapon still bled silence. She stepped carefully across the blackened earth, through stone fields cracked by energy long since spent. She passed monuments that had fallen inward, as if the weight of their meaning had collapsed them from within. And everywhere she walked, she heard them. Not voices, not ghosts, just echoes. Memories without form, emotions without bodies, whole generations of Sith and Jedi, frozen in the moment of final betrayal. Some screamed, some wept, some simply broke not in death but in thought, like their minds shattered before their bodies did. She didn't turn away. She welcomed them, because her life had been forged in silence, and this place, for all its violence, was quiet. At the edge of the great chasm, she stood for a long time. Beneath her lay the shattered remains of the Treyas Academy, once a place of training, now a monument to failure. Shaar didn't need a guide. The Force pulled her toward it, not with urgency, but inevitability, as if she had always meant to come here, as if this was not the beginning of something new, but the continuation of something forgotten. She descended through the cracks in the stone, into chambers where the walls still hissed with static. Sparks jumped across broken hollow projectors. Dust hung in the air, unmoving, like time had been held in suspension. And then she found it, a holocron, broken, split down the middle like a wound of its own. She didn't reach for it. She knelt before it, not in reverence, in caution. The last time she had touched something this deep in the Force, she had stopped dreaming for months. But this was different. This one called her by name, not the name others had given her, the name that lived only in the Force, the one that had no shape, no sound, only silence. She placed her palm over the cracked crystal, and the moment she did, she heard her, not as a voice, as a shadow. Darth Shaar, the betrayer, the exile, the master who had taught others to turn away from everything they loved. What remained of her was not knowledge, it was contempt, and Shaar didn't reject it. She listened, because sometimes the Force speaks loudest through the ones who were cast out. The holocron did not open with light, it opened with pain. A soft pulse, like a heartbeat trapped inside stone, spread across her palm. The fractured crystal flickered, then steadied, glowing dimly from within. Most holocrons spoke in clear holograms, shaped faces, structured lessons. This one breathed. Shadows swirled inside the broken prism, forming shapes that never held long enough to understand. Every fragment moved against the others, as if the holocron resented its own existence. It did not contain knowledge. It contained wounds, and when Shaar leaned closer, they recognized her. Not as an heir, as an echo. The first voice she heard wasn't a voice at all. It was the memory of a sigh, sharp, tired, laced with disappointment, a sound made by someone who had believed too deeply for too long. Then it shifted, becoming words carved from ice. Betrayal is the truest lesson the Force will ever teach. The sentence did not surprise her. It felt familiar. like something she had always known. The shadows twisted again. Images flickered through them, Malachor as it once was, lit by green fire. The silhouettes of Sith lords screaming into the void. The exile walking alone through the ashes. And in all of it, Darth Shaar's presence, cold and watching. The holocron was not telling a story. It was confessing, not to Shaar, to itself. Fragments of Shaar's thoughts had burned into the crystal, unable to fade because betrayal does not die easily. It lingers, it stains, it teaches. Shaar closed her eyes and allowed the memories to unfold. She saw the Jedi Council that cast Shaar out, the students who abandoned her, the Sith who used her, then feared her, and through it all, Shaar's certainty that the Force was not a guide, not a teacher, not a destiny. It was a habit, one the galaxy repeated without question. Shaar felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Shaar had lived her life between two wars, one fought on battlefields and one fought inside the Force itself. And in both, she had been betrayed, not because she was weak, not because she was wrong, because she saw too clearly, and the galaxy never forgives clarity. Shaar opened her eyes. The holocron's glow had dimmed, but the next fragment stirred. I was not destroyed at Malachor, Shaar's voice whispered. I was revealed. The stone beneath Shaar's feet trembled, not from instability, from memory. The whole academy felt alive, as if listening, as if waiting to see what she would do next. She did not recoil from the holocron. She absorbed it, not in hunger, not in reverence, in understanding. Shaar's truths were not a path. They were a warning. Serve no one. Trust nothing. Listen to what others fear to acknowledge. Shaar let each piece settle into her mind like shards aligning into a blade. She didn't take Shaar's philosophy for her own. She molded it, refined it, cut away the weakness born of bitterness. What remained was clean, cold, unforgiving. A way of seeing the Force not as a cycle, but as a fracture. The holocron flickered again, struggling. One last echo rose from it, quiet but sharp enough to draw breath from her chest. Pain is not the enemy. It is the teacher. And the Force obeys those who listen to it. The light faded. The shadows vanished. Only silence remained. Shaar closed her hand around the shattered holocron, feeling the faint warmth of what had once been a master's final truth. She did not thank it. Truth does not ask for gratitude. It only asks to be used. She didn't leave Malachor immediately. The galaxy still burned somewhere far above, but time did not flow the same here. The ruins breathed beneath her, deep and patient, like the bones of something too large to ever fully die. She wandered the lower corridors of the Shaar's Academy without fear, because this place, like her, had already been broken, and it remembered who had done the breaking. She sat for hours in collapsed meditation chambers, where shadows still clung to the walls, where Sith acolytes had once trained under Shaar's cold eye, only to betray her the moment fear returned to them. The holocron had shown her what betrayal looked like, but the silence showed her why it mattered. Because betrayal, when repeated enough times, does not become history. It becomes structure. It becomes design. The Jedi betrayed Shaar because she questioned the Force. The Sith betrayed her because she sought more than survival. Her students betrayed her because they wanted power without consequence. Shaar wasn't shocked by any of it. She had lived all of it in smaller forms, in cult chambers, in war camps, in whispers behind her back. Now, standing where Shaar once stood, she understood something simple and terrifying. Betrayal is not a flaw in the galaxy. It is the shape of it. She stood at the edge of the central hall, where once lightsabers had clashed and truths had shattered. Her breath fogged the air even though there was no cold, and as she stared at the ruin, a question formed. Would she be betrayed too? And if so, by who? The Jedi had nothing to offer her. The Sith would fear her silence more than any saber. The Republic didn't even know she existed. But the Force, the wound that had followed her since birth, had not turned away. It had led her here. To Malachor, to try her, not to serve her. To learn what happens when you refuse to serve anyone. She began to speak softly aloud, testing ideas as if Treya were still listening. To understand the Force, you must step outside of it. No, not quite. To speak its language, you must refuse its command. Closer, she paused, and then said it clearly. The Force binds all things, but binds is not the same as frees. That one stayed. The Sith believe freedom comes through strength. The Jedi believe peace comes through surrender. But both are chains. Shaar began walking the old halls, not in silence, but in thought. Her fingers brushed across the old inscriptions on the wall, half-faded lessons in pain, strength, patience, dominance. She traced them not to believe them, to witness what they had left behind. The Sith had taught rage. The Jedi had taught control. Treya had seen through both. And now, Shaar did too. No one had trained her. No one had named her. No one had crowned her with the title of Sith. But in the silence, something had shifted. She had listened to death, endured every test without breaking, faced every voice of power and seen its weakness. And now, she stood in a place built on betrayal, not as a follower, but as proof. That pain, when understood, does not chain you. It cuts away what you no longer need. When she finally turned back toward the surface, the air behind her stayed still, as if the temple did not mourn her leaving, as if it understood what she had taken. Not relics, not artifacts, just lessons. And lessons can become weapons. She walked away from Malachor without leaving a mark. No scars carved into the stone. No message left behind. No name etched into its ruins. But something followed her. Not a shadow, a shape, a clarity. It did not scream like the Sith. It did not whisper like the Jedi. It waited. Inside her, she boarded a supply freighter without question. No one asked where she came from. War made people stop asking. She rode the empty corridors in silence, surrounded by crates and broken droids. Lights flickered overhead. The crew never came near her, because something in her eyes made them look away. She studied them, their patterns, their fears, the way they spoke about orders without believing them, the way they blamed others for things they hadn't dared question. And beneath it all, the same wound, small, but spreading. The Force moved through them too, but not like a current, not like light. It moved like memory, slow, thick, unresolved. None of them had trained in the Force. None of them even noticed her presence. But their pain drifted toward her like metal drawn to a storm. And she understood now why. She was no longer just a vessel. She was a mirror. And mirrors do not heal. They reflect. In the months that followed, she wandered between warfronts and ruins. Never for long. Never in one place. The galaxy was busy killing itself. She didn't interfere. She watched. And in the silence, her philosophy sharpened. She no longer asked what side was right. She asked what side had forgotten it was wrong. She no longer asked who would win. She asked who would lose and still call it peace. She learned to read the Force the way a cartographer reads terrain, not for prophecy but for structure. She traced fractures that Jedi refused to see. Patterns the Sith mistook for power. She heard planets scream without voice. She watched children forget their names during sieges and felt it echo in the Force like a fading star. And every time someone begged for answers, she remained still, because answers were no longer enough. She didn't want to save the galaxy. She wanted to understand why it kept trying to destroy itself. That was the seed, the one Treya had planted, even from death. And now, it had grown. Her philosophy was not one of peace. It was one of truth. Hard, cold, uncompromising. To survive this galaxy, you must see without flinching. To change it, you must wound it in return. Not with war, not with rage, with memory. Memory that cannot be erased. And she would become that memory. Not as a master. Not yet. But as a force the galaxy would learn to fear. Because she was not born from a temple. She had no order. No code. No homeworld to avenge. No master to honor. Only scars. And the voice that had first spoken in the mines. Then echoed through the vault. Then whispered through Treya's shattered holocron. Now it was hers. No longer outside of her. Now within. And when she finally spoke again to the Force, to herself, to whatever still listened in the stars, she spoke not in anger, not in prophecy, but in certainty. I will not follow. I will not serve. I will not save. She walked beneath the stars that night, alone, cloaked in silence. And for the first time, the Force didn't pull her in any direction. Because it understood now. She wasn't meant to be guided. She was meant to guide others. Into the wound. She never called him an apprentice. Not aloud, not in thought. But he followed her all the same. He was no more than 15 when they crossed paths on the outskirts of Zygerian space, where slavers hunted the ruins of fallen colonies and called it reclamation. She had been watching a convoy not to save it, just to see how many lives the war still discarded with a smile. He was among the captives, thin, dirty, wide-eyed in the way that only people with nothing left to lose still were. He should have died with the others. But something in him screamed too loud to ignore. Not with his mouth, with the Force, not strength, not anger. Desperation. He clawed at a guard with a broken chain still fastened to his wrist, trying to protect a stranger. He failed, of course. Was thrown down. Kicked until he stopped moving. But he tried. She watched him from the cliffs above. And for reasons she didn't understand yet, she intervened. One gesture, one wave of the hand. The guards froze mid-step, their bodies locked in place as if the gravity had shifted around them. No lightning, no blade, no sound. The captives scattered, but the boy didn't run. He looked up at her instead, blood on his mouth, terror in his bones. And still, he looked at her like she was the only thing in the galaxy that made sense. She turned away. She walked. But he followed. At first, he kept his distance, a shadow behind a shadow. No voice, no questions. Just the sound of his steps, always a little too cautious, a little too afraid. She let him stay. Maybe because she wanted to see how long he would last. Maybe because she needed something to hate. Or maybe because she had already seen what would happen. He carried nothing but silence. No training, no title, no future. But in the quiet moments by the fire, beneath the ruins of forgotten outposts, he watched her with the kind of reverence people once gave to gods. Not out of worship, out of need. And slowly, she began to speak, not lessons, not teachings, just questions. Why did you fight for them? Why did you stay? Why are you still following me? He answered all of them the same way. Because I'm not afraid of you. But that was a lie. She could feel it in every breath he took. And he wasn't alone in the lie. Because part of her, the part she had buried beneath the fire and the vault and the wound, wanted him to be telling the truth. She watched him train alone, trying to mimic the movements he'd seen her use. He had no precision, no control, but when he reached for the force, it answered him. Not with power, with pain. And she wondered, had someone else once watched her like this? Had someone once allowed her to survive when they should have walked away? She didn't know, but she let him stay. Day after day, week after week, until the moment came when she stopped thinking of him as a shadow, and started thinking of him as a reflection, not of who she was, but of who she might have been, if the wound had never opened. She did not train him with hope. She trained him with intent. Because hope had broken her once, long before she had a name worth remembering, and she would not allow it to live in him. Not while he followed her. Not while he looked at her with those wide, foolish eyes full of belief. Belief was the first thing she tried to break. It happened on a barren moon used by smugglers as a hidden supply point. No life, no shelter, just stones sharp enough to tear skin, and wind cold enough to turn breath into pain. She left him there. No food, no tools, no water. Survive, she said. He stared at her as if expecting more. There was no more. She walked away. Hours passed, then a day, then two. She returned on the third morning, expecting to find his body curled, frozen, finally silent. Instead, she found him standing, barely, bruised, shaking, but alive. He had dug pits to collect the little moisture the ground could hold, shaped stones into crude weapons, fought off a creature twice his size with nothing but a broken femur he'd torn from its carcass. He bowed when she returned. Not in gratitude, in defiance. She should have killed him then, but she didn't. The second thing she tried to break was loyalty. They traveled to a world caught between two Sith warlords, one rising, one fading. Armies clashed across deserts where nothing grew. Villages switched leaders every few days. It was the perfect place to teach him that loyalty was just another form of blindness. She led him into a settlement where the people worshipped a single warrior who claimed dominion. The warrior's banner flew high, blood red against the yellow sand. The people looked at Shaar with suspicion, but they saw the boy differently. They saw him as one of them, not a fighter, a believer. She watched how he listened to their stories, how he helped their wounded, how he tried to hide his smile when children tugged at his cloak. He had lived his whole life without belonging. And now, for the first time, he tasted it. That was why she tore it from him. She walked into the warrior's tent, killed him without drawing a weapon, and left his corpse for the villagers to find. When they saw the body, they fell to their knees not to mourn, but to beg for mercy. They didn't beg the boy. They begged her. He saw their fear. He saw their betrayal. He saw the truth. They had never cared for him. They had cared for the symbol he represented. And now, that symbol was ash. He looked at her with anger for the first time. Good. Anger was honest. The third thing she tried to break was attachment. Not to others. To her. He had followed her across worlds, through storms and ruins and silence. He had survived because of her. He had grown because of her. And somewhere in that quiet space between suffering and longing, he had begun to rely on her presence. This could not be allowed. So she forced him to kill. Not out of survival, out of choice. She brought him to a battlefield littered with dying soldiers from both sides, Sith, mercenaries, deserters, children who should have never been there. She made him choose someone to end, someone he couldn't justify, someone he couldn't hate. He cried, he begged, he shook, but he did it. And when he finished, he didn't collapse. He stood. A line inside him had broken, and a new one had formed. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. He was afraid of himself. It happened on a world no one remembered. A quiet rock, half buried in forgotten archives. No strategic value. No settlements. Just a single ruined structure, a temple without a name, swallowed by vines and silence. The force was thick here, but not strong. Not dark, just tired. She brought him there for one reason: to end it. She had taught him all she would. Lessons wrapped in survival. Philosophy wrapped in pain. He had learned. He had endured. But the longer he followed her, the more she saw something dangerous forming behind his eyes. Not power, not fear, hope. It lived in the way he looked at her when she wasn't watching, in the way he offered food first, in the way he sat beside her even when she asked for silence. There was no defiance in him, no ambition, just belief. And that was the threat. She had killed masters for less, had walked away from temples, armies, and truth itself to keep her clarity intact. But now it was being pulled at quietly, carefully by someone who had no idea what he was doing to her. So she chose the temple. As a test, not for him, for herself. They reached the heart of the ruin by midday. A circular chamber, half collapsed, bathed in soft golden light from a hole in the ceiling. Dust drifted like mist. Carvings on the floor spoke of a force cult that had vanished before the Mandalorian Wars. It didn't matter. This was where it would end. She stood at the center and told him to draw his blade. He hesitated. She didn't. Her saber ignited in silence. No flourish, no warning. He didn't move. He looked at her, confusion blooming across his face like a wound he didn't know he had. "You taught me to survive," he said. "No," she replied. "I taught you to see." He stepped back. She followed. He tried to speak again, but her blade came close, too close, and he finally moved. Instinct, not intent. Defense, not rage. She struck again. And again. He blocked. Poorly. She wasn't trying to kill him quickly. She was waiting for him to stop holding back. Waiting for the moment when he would stop trying to understand her. And finally fight. But he didn't. Even as she carved a shallow line across his shoulder. Even as his knees buckled. Even as he stared at her like a child watching a star collapse. He didn't fight her. He just whispered, "I would have followed you anywhere." And something in her hand trembled. Not enough to see, but enough to feel. A breath, a flicker, a fracture. Not in him, in her. Because she remembered a night, long ago, in a crawl space beneath the mines when she too had looked at someone who did not love her, but had chosen not to end her. A shadow of a memory, a face she could no longer place. She hesitated, and in that single breath, he saw it. His eyes widened, not in victory, in grief, because now, he understood. He understood what she was about to do, what she had been trying to do from the beginning, and why she couldn't finish it. Because she had seen herself in him, and now, she couldn't unsee it. She turned away, deactivated her blade, said nothing, and for the first time in his life, he stepped back from her without following. She left him there. No words, no warning, just silence. He didn't call out to her, didn't beg for answers. He only stood in the center of the ruin, one hand pressed to the shallow wound on his shoulder, and watched her fade into the trees. She thought that would be the end of it, but the Force didn't agree. For weeks, she moved from world to world, trying to return to the quiet that had always guided her. Listening to the fractures in the galaxy, watching the slow decay of empires pretending to be stable. But it was different now. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Not in pain, not in anger, in stillness, the way he had looked at her in that final moment, not with fear but with understanding. It had taken years to build her walls, to bury everything that made her weak, and with one look, he had cracked it open. She hated him for it, because he hadn't tried to save her. He had simply seen her, and that was something she didn't know how to kill. She told herself it didn't matter, that he would die soon, hunted by the Jedi, consumed by the Sith, forgotten by the war. But no matter how many times she said it, the Force whispered something else. He was still alive, and worse, he still believed in her. So she went back, not because she wanted to, because she had to. The ruin was still standing. Weeds had begun to grow through the cracks, light still poured through the ceiling, and he was still there sitting alone, cross-legged in the center, his eyes closed, breathing slowly. He didn't move when she entered, didn't flinch, as if he'd known she would return. She approached him quietly, footsteps soft against the stone. He opened his eyes and smiled, not like a boy, like someone who had waited his entire life for that moment. She didn't speak. He did. "I'm not your weakness," he said. She stared at him, waiting. "I'm your mirror," he added, "and you hate me because I remind you of what you lost." Still, she said nothing, but something in her chest tightened. He stood, and then he did the one thing she had never expected. He bowed, not in fear, not in servitude, in choice. "You don't have to teach me. You don't have to care. I'll follow you anyway. Because even if you try to destroy me, I already know who you are." She turned away, not out of rejection, because she was afraid of what she might say if she stayed. But he followed again, just a few steps behind, as he always had, and she let him. Not because she trusted him, not because she forgave herself, because she had tried to kill the part of her that still felt, and failed. That part had a name now, a voice, a presence. It walked behind her, in silence, not asking for anything, and it would break her one day, or it would become something else entirely. She didn't know. She only knew this. There are things in the galaxy the Force will not let you destroy, and sometimes those things follow you, not to be saved, but to remind you what you are. The galaxy burned. Mandalorian fleets pushed into the mid-rim, raising colonies that had no time to send distress calls. Sith lords, old and new, emerged from the unknown regions and claimed titles like swords blunt, sharp, or stolen. The Republic clung to structure. The Jedi clung to peace. And in the spaces between those grand movements, she moved, not as a commander, not as a name, as something quieter, a fracture. Shaar never declared herself. She had no banner, no army, no throne. But her influence moved faster than ships, traveled deeper than lies. She left no trace on star charts, but left doubt in every council that once believed itself whole. Her war was not seen, only felt. It began with a silence on Cinderek 4s, a key mining world the Sith sought to seize for fuel supply lines. The Republic fortified the surface. Intelligence was clean. no invasion imminent. And then the leadership turned on itself. 2 generals disappeared. A senator was found dead. The Jedi assigned to protect the facility vanished en route. No battle ever came. The planet surrendered quietly. Not to the Sith, to the silence. Whispers of sabotage. Accusations of treason. But no evidence, because there was nothing left to prove. She had passed through the system 3 days earlier. Not to speak, to listen, to find the seams in the Republic's loyalty, the cracks in its command. The fractures no one else saw until they split wide and swallowed everything. No one traced it back to her. They couldn't. Because Shaar didn't leave messages. She left decisions. People convinced they were acting freely. Leaders convinced they were protecting something. Jedi convinced they were obeying the will of the Force. And when the dust cleared, they all asked the same question. What just happened? She didn't answer. Because the best victories are the ones no one can name. She moved through the outer rim, not as a warrior, but as a presence. She sat at trade tables between factions who swore they would never speak. She advised warlords with more ambition than vision. She manipulated neutral systems into declaring loyalties they didn't believe in. She didn't tell them what to do. She helped them see what they already feared. And fear does the rest. Even the Jedi began to feel it. A sense that something was happening beneath the surface, that the Force was shifting in ways they couldn't trace. A war they couldn't define, not of sabers, of intentions. By the time the Mandalorians reached Duros, Shaar had already turned 3 key supply routes into contested zones not with fleets, but with rumors. Pirates emboldened by whispers of Republic betrayal. Senators sabotaged by scandals that had no source. Systems destabilized by leaks that no one remembered creating. She was never there. And yet, everything moved around her. The Republic saw chaos. The Sith saw opportunity. But no one saw her. Because she was not a shadow of a faction. She was a fracture in the fabric of power itself. She did not want to conquer. She wanted to shape. Not loudly. Not quickly. With patience. And over time, the war that would one day be remembered as inevitable had already begun. In silence, there was no throne room, no war table, no command center, just a dim cargo bay aboard a freighter whose name was never logged. Inside, a single star map glowed on the floor, old, cracked, flickering where the outer rim spiraled toward chaos. She sat beside it, silent, one hand resting on the edge. Watching, she had no armies to move, no fleets to deploy. But the lines on that map responded to her all the same. Because war does not begin with soldiers, it begins with doubt. And doubt was something she understood better than anyone. Her apprentice sat near her, silent, watching from a distance. He never asked what she was doing. He only observed, and slowly, he began to see it too. This was not about who controlled the galaxy. It was about who could reshape it. The Jedi were stretched thin. Too many wars. Too many ideologies pulling them apart from the inside. Some wanted peace. Some wanted victory. Some wanted clarity. And found only silence. The Sith were divided, fractured. Dozens of lords trying to wear the same crown. Each one thinking their rage would make them strong. But strength without vision only burns. And the Republic was slow. Not stupid, just tired. Tired of corruption. Tired of delay. Tired of pretending things hadn't already broken. Shaar didn't need to destroy them. She only needed to move the pieces they ignored. A governor on Hime IV, who could be convinced that neutrality meant betrayal. A Jedi Knight on patrol who would question a general's order, then vanish without cause. A Hutt syndicate ready to break treaty for one shipment of Sith artifacts and in doing so trigger 5 border disputes. She traced the lines with her fingers, not like a tactician, like a surgeon, cutting carefully without shaking. The apprentice finally spoke. "How do you know where to push?" She answered without looking. "I listen." "To what?" he asked. She turned toward him, her voice quieter than breath. "To the wound." He didn't understand, not yet, but he would. Because every conflict, every system on that map was already broken in some way. There were no strongholds left, only places where collapse hadn't finished its work. And collapse always starts with the smallest noise. A single ambassador changing tone, a merchant guild shifting prices, a Jedi hesitating before igniting their saber. She followed those sounds, not through hyperspace lanes, through the Force. It didn't call her with visions. It showed her the shape of failure before it arrived. And she used that shape. Each move she made on the map wasn't about gain. It was about corrosion, making the Jedi question their code, making the Sith doubt their dominance, making both sides look inward until all they saw were cracks. The apprentice watched her place a single marker on the map, a forgotten moon on the edge of a trade corridor, unimportant to any faction. She looked at him and said, "This world will fall in 6 weeks." He blinked. "There's nothing there." She nodded. "There won't be." When he asked her why it mattered, she smiled not with warmth but with precision. "Because a treaty no one remembers depends on it, and when it falls, 2 allies will become enemies." She said it the way others recite weather forecasts. Inevitable, unfeeling, true. Her fingers moved again, and the map obeyed. Assassins were common in this era. Sith trained them. Hutts bought them. The Republic feared them. But Shaar didn't use assassins. She created them. Not through training, through opportunity, a whisper placed in the right ear, a truth revealed at the wrong time, a fear pushed just enough to break the surface. Everyone believed assassins were the sharpest instruments of war. But she knew the truth. A frightened mind kills more efficiently than any blade. It began on Ratatak, where 2 Sith warlords fought for control of gladiator pits that doubled as recruitment rings. Their rivalry threatened to spill into the mid-rim. Armies were gathering, treaties were forming. The Jedi considered intervention. Shaar ended the conflict without ever touching a weapon. She approached one warlord in disguise, a civilian face, a quiet presence, and told him a single fact. His rival planned to betray him at dawn. She left before he could ask how she knew. She visited the rival before dusk, and said the same thing. At sunrise, both warlords were dead, not by her hand, by their own. Their armies scattered, their ambitions evaporated. Their planets returned to silence, and the galaxy never learned why the conflict disappeared so suddenly. Not every problem needs a blade. Some need only a reflection. On another world, a Republic senator known for peacekeeping efforts suffered a crisis of conscience. His son had joined a fringe militia. His daughter had been taken by debt collectors. His patience was fading. Shaar didn't threaten him. She didn't manipulate him. She simply sat beside him in a garden overlooking the upper levels of Alderaanian architecture, watching the sky turn blue with morning light. She said one sentence, "You can't save both." He collapsed inward quietly, painfully, and resigned from office hours later. His absence stalled 3 negotiations. The Republic reconsidered its alliances. A single political vacuum widened into a rift. No assassination, no blood, just a silence placed with precision. Her apprentice watched her work with growing unease. "This isn't war," he whispered once. "It's unraveling." She didn't correct him, because he was right. War destroys bodies. She destroyed certainty. That was the difference. On the outskirts of Duro, she intercepted a Jedi task force that had been tracking a secret Sith envoy. They expected a confrontation. Blades drawn, words exchanged. But when they reached the rendezvous point, both factions were already gone. All Shaar had done was send an anonymous message to each side. "You have been betrayed." They fled before meeting. Trust shattered. Years later, historians would call it a series of logistical failures. But the Force remembered her fingers on the sequence. Each event she shaped became part of a larger pattern one no formal historian ever recognized. A senator retiring unexpectedly. A Sith Lord falling to paranoia. A pirate fleet abandoning its contract. A newly knighted Jedi questioning a command. None of these incidents were linked. Yet together, they shifted the galaxy. Her apprentice tried once to confront her. "You're not choosing a side," he said. "You're breaking both." She looked at him with eyes that no longer held warmth. "I am showing them what they already are." "And what is that?" he asked. "Fragile." He didn't understand then. Not fully. But he began to fear her. Not because she killed. Because she didn't need to. Because secrets followed her. Because silence answered her. Because the Shadow War was no longer something she observed. It was something she became. They never spoke her name in the war councils. Not once. Not in Jedi chambers. Not in Sith conclaves. Not in the bunkers beneath Senate Plaza. Because they didn't know it. But her influence passed between them like cold air in a sealed room. A presence felt only when everything else stopped moving. Like the sudden stillness before a structure collapses. Like the breath that catches before a truth is spoken. They didn't see her, but they followed her. Without knowing, treaties signed because the alternative was worse. Alliances forged to escape rumors that had no origin. A Sith Lord changing planets because a single envoy never arrived. No one understood why these things happened. They only knew they kept happening. And by the time they looked deeper, it was already too late. Shaar did not watch these movements with pride. She watched them with precision. Every ripple she created moved something else not by force, but by memory. Systems changed not because she told them to, but because she showed them what they already were. Fragile, frightened, and willing to follow anyone who could see the shape of collapse more clearly than they could. She never gave speeches. She never gathered followers. She left patterns, and the Force remembered. Her apprentice, now older, still walked behind her, but his eyes had changed. He no longer asked why she acted, he only watched the results, and wondered where it would lead. One night, he finally asked the question that had lived between them for years. "Do you ever doubt it?" She didn't pretend not to understand. He meant the path, the silence, the war behind the war. She stared out at a ruined battlefield where no side had claimed victory, where droids still twitched in broken formations and lightsaber burns scarred the walls. "No," she said, "because doubt is for the ones who still think they can win." He didn't respond, because he was beginning to see it too. This wasn't about winning. It was about reshaping. About showing the galaxy that its systems were not broken by war. They had been born to break. The Jedi would fall not because they were weak, but because they mistook silence for safety. The Sith would burn not because of rebellion, but because they always chose fire when patience was required. And in the ashes that followed, someone else would speak, not with doctrine, not with vengeance, with clarity, the kind that only comes after everything else has been stripped away. On Renvar, she allowed a Republic listening post to detect her presence. On purpose. Within a week, 2 Jedi strike teams were dispatched. Neither returned. She didn't kill them. She let them see. Let them glimpse what the Force had become, not a current of light and dark, but a wound too deep to mend. When they tried to name her, the words failed. When they tried to act, the Force did not answer. She left them in silence. One survived. Barely. And when he returned to Coruscant, he didn't give a report. He gave a warning. There's something else, he said. It doesn't fight. It doesn't lead. It listens. And when it speaks, he never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. The war would continue. The maps would change. The Jedi and Sith would keep fighting the shadows they thought they understood. But now, something had changed. Because they finally knew what they were fighting wasn't a person. It was a presence. A force without a banner. A shadow they couldn't see, but could never outrun. It began on a moon without a name. Not with blood. Not with fire. With stillness. The kind of stillness that makes sound feel like a mistake. Shaar stood at the edge of a dried riverbed, watching light flicker through clouds that didn't move. Nothing breathed here. Nothing grew. The Force pulsed beneath the surface, but not in rhythm. It stuttered like it didn't know she was there, or didn't want to be. She felt it first in the air. A shift. Not hostile. Not familiar. A recognition. As if the Force itself had turned its gaze, and then looked away. She had always heard whispers. Since the mines, since the vault, since Treya. But this was different. It wasn't memory. It wasn't warning. It was observation. Something in the Force had begun to notice her again, not as a user, not as a servant, as something it couldn't name. She didn't call for it. She didn't reach for it. And still, it came. At night, while she walked through the ruins of a Jedi outpost swallowed by time, the air trembled around her, not from fear, from refusal. The stones beneath her feet cracked without sound. She saw no figures, no spirits, just reflections of things that had never happened. A Jedi child screaming into fire. A Sith kneeling in silence before a mirror that would not break. A war that ended before it began. Visions, but not hers. She spoke none of it aloud. Because she understood, the Force was not trying to teach her anymore. It was reacting. Like a body trying to pull away from pain. It was not just flowing around her. It was breaking around her. She told her apprentice to leave for a time, not in anger, in mercy. He obeyed, not because he feared her, because he saw what was happening and did not want to see what came next. Alone, Shaar began to walk deeper into the quiet corners of the galaxy, not to spread influence, not to manipulate, to listen. And what she heard did not belong to the living, nor to the dead. The voices didn't speak language. They echoed in shapes, in sights, in weight, a hand pressing against her spine when no one stood behind her, a word forming in her throat that wasn't hers to say. The Force had always been described as luminous, binding, alive, but now it recoiled, not from darkness, from imbalance. And she knew why. Because she was no longer a thread in its weave. She was the pull that made the threads unravel. En route, a Jedi Master approached her without a weapon. He meant to speak. But before he could speak, he dropped to his knees. He looked at her and cried, not because she had harmed him, because he saw something he couldn't explain. A moment from his past that had never happened. A loss he had never suffered. A truth he had never earned. It broke him. She touched nothing and walked away. This was not strength. This was not victory. This was what happens when the Force encounters something it cannot absorb. Something that listens, but does not answer. Something that sees, but does not reflect. Something that is not light, not dark, not balance, a fracture, not in her, in everything else. The Order didn't understand what they were facing. Not at first. To them, she was a Ruuma, a thread in the shadow of larger wars. Jedi fell, yes, but Jedi had always fallen. Knights vanished in battle. Padawans died in the field. It was tragic, but familiar. Until the silence began to follow them. It started with a mission to Denava. 3 Jedi, 2 Knights, 1 Master. They were sent to investigate a series of planetary disappearances. Trade routes gone dark, settlements emptied. No signs of battle, no known enemy. They found her instead. No fortress, no army, just a figure waiting in the center of an abandoned city. Dust in the wind. Nothing moved but her breath. They drew their sabers. She did not. The Master stepped forward to speak but staggered before the words could leave his mouth. The youngest knight screamed and dropped his weapon. The other tried to steady them both, and then they all stopped. Not from fear, from grief. Their minds filled with things they had never seen. A brother they'd never lost. A temple that had never burned. A love they had never betrayed. Visions, deep, personal, shaped by truths they didn't know they were carrying. Shaar said nothing. She didn't move. She didn't strike. And still, they broke. The youngest wept until his throat collapsed. The Master sat down in the dust, shaking, whispering a name over and over. No one knew who it belonged to. Not even him. Only the third remained standing, and even then barely. She tried to speak, tried to ignite her saber again. But her hand wouldn't close. The Force was still around her, but it didn't listen anymore. Not here. Not with Shaar. Shaar stepped forward once, and the knight fell without a blow. Unconscious, breathing, broken. When Republic recovery teams found the 3 Jedi days later, none could explain what had happened. Their bodies were unharmed, their weapons untouched, but something in their minds had come apart. The Jedi called it a psychic anomaly. They filed it away. They always did, until it happened again, and again. Tython, Blue 2, Ord Temis. Every system whispered the same story. Jedi sent to confront something unknown, and returning in pieces. Not dead, not defeated, just emptied. The Order began to panic behind closed doors. They assigned watchers, investigators, even masters of the High Council. One returned with no memory of who he was. Another attempted to erase his own name from the archives. A third never spoke again. Each of them encountered her, not in battle, in stillness. And still, the Council refused to speak her name. Because they didn't have one. They only had patterns, visions, tears, collapse. No dark side signature. No saber scars. No survivors willing to say exactly what they'd seen. Just silence. And Jedi, who wept. Shaar didn't seek them. She didn't hunt them. They came to her. And when they did, she showed them something worse than death. She showed them the fracture. The place in the Force where things stop making sense. Where light and dark no longer answer. Where names lose meaning. where the past becomes the future, and the future refuses to arrive. She never raised her hand. She didn't need to, because the Jedi had been trained to trust the Force, and the Force had begun to retreat. At some point, people stopped describing her as a woman. Whispers passed through cantinas and war camps alike, not about a Sith Lord, not about a Jedi exile, but about a presence. Something that moved through systems unnoticed. Something that didn't kill, but changed. They stopped asking what she wanted. They started asking where she'd been. Because everywhere she went, something cracked. Not visibly, not immediately, but eventually. Peace negotiations unraveled. Alliances dissolved. Generals resigned without explanation. It never looked like sabotage, but it never felt like coincidence. And beneath it all, the Force shifted. Not toward her, around her. She walked through cities where Jedi once meditated and felt nothing. Not because the Force was gone, because it had pulled back like light withdrawing from a shadow too wide to cross. People who stood near her felt it, even if they had no training. They forgot their names for a breath. They remembered people they hadn't lost yet. They cried for things that hadn't happened. And then it passed. She said nothing to them. She didn't have to. Because she was no longer a figure. She was an event. Her apprentice, older now, colder now, asked her once what she had become. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't know. Because language couldn't hold it anymore. The Sith had names for power. Titles layered like armor. They had lords, Darths, emperors. She wore none of it. The Jedi had forms for pain. Compassion, fear, detachment, redemption. They saw suffering as a path to wisdom. She walked past all of it. She didn't hate. She didn't hope. She remembered, and the Force responded not as a servant, but as something trying to understand. She had once thought herself its vessel, then its reflection, then its wound. But now, the truth was quieter. She was the place in the galaxy where the Force didn't reach, and where it chose not to. Because even the Force is afraid of what it cannot shape. On Arcania, she passed through a gathering of Force sensitives who had never chosen sides. Seers, oracles, grey robes, and distant eyes. They watched her cross the old halls and fell to their knees unbidden. Not in worship, in retreat. They felt what she carried, not death, not darkness. Absence, not a void. A mirror that refused to reflect. And mirrors can destroy. Because people believe the Force defines them, that it gives them clarity, strength, identity. But when they look into something that returns none of that back, they unravel. A Jedi Knight named Aelari tracked her for weeks across forgotten hyperspace lanes, trying to understand what was causing the breakdown of vision among her order. She didn't bring a weapon. She brought a question. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Shaar didn't reply. "So?" Aelari asked again. Not as a Jedi. As someone who wanted to believe there was still a reason beneath the silence. Shaar looked at her and said only one thing. "I'm not doing anything." The knight lowered her eyes and whispered, "That's what terrifies me." The next morning, Aelari left her lightsaber behind in the sand and returned to the Jedi Council with a sealed report. She never spoke again. The Council buried the report, just like they buried the others. Because you cannot fight something that has no shape. You cannot destroy what does not stand. And Shaar had become that. Not a warrior, not a ghost, a presence. A pause in the galaxy's rhythm, where meaning ends, and something colder begins. It happened first on a Republic carrier drifting above the rim, a ship full of soldiers who had never heard her name. never seen her face, never fought in the same battle she moved beneath. They felt it anyway, a hum, soft, barely audible, not mechanical, not communicative, a vibration that didn't pass through metal, but through memory. A clone trooper in the barracks dropped his helmet without knowing why. A medic forgot the name of the patient she was treating even as she said it aloud. A lieutenant stepped into a corridor and had to grip the wall, overcome by grief so deep he thought he was drowning. None of them could explain it, but every one of them heard it. A sound that seemed to come from nowhere, and yet felt like it rose directly behind their ears. A sound no one in the galaxy should ever hear. They called it a resonance, a frequency, a disturbance. But the truth was simpler. It was her. Not her voice, not her presence, her fracture. A ripple of force meeting something it could no longer absorb and recoiling. Waves bouncing off an edge no one knew existed. This was not power, it was not attack. It was the force trying to understand what it had created and failing. The next time it happened, it reached a Jedi. Knight Ceres Van was meditating in a quiet garden on Ossus when the resonance hit. She didn't fall. She didn't scream. She broke. Her breath froze. Her face twisted, not in pain, but in recognition, like she had just remembered something she had spent her entire life trying to forget. Moments later, she wept so violently that the stones beneath her cracked. She saw Shaar, not physically, her imprint, her echo, the shape of someone who should not exist. Not light, not dark, not absence. Something in between, something the Force had been avoiding. Master Dinar found the young knight trembling and incoherent. When he touched her shoulder, he felt nothing at first, then everything at once. For a heartbeat, he heard it too. The sound. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a word. It was a fracture echoing outward, a sound of something splitting that had never been whole. A sound like a wound remembering how it was made. Dinar collapsed. Ceres reached for him, but her hands were shaking too violently to hold anything steady. Together they sank to their knees, gasping as if the air had thickened around them. The Jedi archives would later classify the event as an anomaly, a vision surge, a psychic wave, but neither of them had seen a future. They had heard a truth with no language, a truth the Force had spent centuries trying to bury beneath prophecy and doctrine. It had failed, and Shaar was the proof. Wherever she walked, the resonance followed, not constantly, not predictably, but like thunder arriving long after lightning has already struck. A delayed acknowledgement of a reality the galaxy was not prepared to face. Her apprentice felt it too. The first time, he doubled over, clutching his chest, whispering her name with terror so deep it made him sound like a child again. She watched him, silent, cold, not because she didn't care, because she did, and that was the danger. The resonance faded. He breathed again, but he didn't meet her eyes, because now he understood what she had become. Not a teacher, not a master, not a Sith, a sound, a wound in the Force large enough that reality had begun to echo around its edges. And once you hear that sound, you can never unhear it. It happened in less than a day. 3 Jedi enclaves fell. No invasion, no warning, no declaration. One moment, there was light. The next, silence. It was not an attack. It was an absence. And the galaxy only noticed when the Jedi did not answer. On Seren Prime, the Sentinels were trained to detect disturbance in the Force. They felt nothing. Not rage, not sorrow, not even death. What they felt was the sky above them blink. A pressure behind the stars. A shift. Then the comms failed. Then the temperature dropped. And then, for a moment, everything stood still. One by one, the Jedi inside the Enclave collapsed. Not from wounds, from knowing. Every one of them, even the youngest, felt something impossible, like their connection to the Force had passed through a fracture. A place it shouldn't go. And then, it didn't come back. By the time Republic scouts arrived, the compound was empty. No bodies. No survivors. Just one word burned into the stone at the center. Shaar. It was the first time the galaxy saw her name in daylight. The second enclave was on Usalon, hidden beneath desert stone and ancient shielding. It had stood for centuries untouched by war, protected by secrecy. It vanished in 13 minutes. No signs of battle, no energy readings, no ships entering orbit. One moment, it was there. Then it wasn't. Republic cartographers redrew the map that afternoon, confused, believing it to be an error, a glitch, until a scout, days later, returned with sensor data from the outer dunes, waves of residual heat, radiation, and something else, a frequency that didn't match any weapon. A sound buried beneath sound. The same one the Jedi had begun to fear. The sound that came with her. And just like that, the myth of Darth Shaar stepped out of the shadows. Because myths kill quietly, she did not. The third enclave was different. It was defended. It was warned. And it still fell. Because it wasn't about numbers anymore. It wasn't about tactics. It was about inevitability. Master Kylen, one of the oldest living Jedi historians, stood in the center of the archive chamber as the walls began to tremble. Not from explosions, from the Force itself. It screamed, not in pain, in warning. She's here. Shaar didn't come to argue. She didn't come to explain. She walked alone through the great doors, no armor, no escort, and the Jedi did not strike, because every one of them had seen her, in their dreams, in half-memories they couldn't place, in visions they'd buried, and they were afraid, not of her power, of what it meant that she existed at all. She did not attack them. She asked a question. What do you serve? One knight answered, the light. Another said, the Republic. And Master Kylen, oldest of them all, whispered, the illusion of balance. Shaar smiled, not with joy, with grief. She spoke a name, one they didn't recognize, one lost to history, and the room split open. Not from her will, from the weight of everything the Jedi refused to face. Some tried to run, others knelt. Only one raised a saber, and he never reached her. By nightfall, the Enclave was dust, and for the first time in generations, the Jedi sent no messenger, no warning, because there was nothing to warn against. No army, no doctrine, just one woman, and the sky that burned in her wake. The Jedi did not speak her name, not at first. They referred to her as an anomaly, a disturbance, a shadow beyond perception. Council reports described her as a Force fracture, not a person, not a threat, just a malfunction in the order of things. But the galaxy does not fear anomalies. It fears stories, and her story began to spread long before anyone could stop it. A captain on a Republic dreadnought claimed to have seen a woman walking through the void between two collapsing ships, untouched by flame. He survived with his memory shredded, whispering the same word over and over until the medics sedated him. Shaar, a Mandalorian scout, reported a lone figure moving across a battlefield after the fighting had ended. No armor, no mask, The dead shifted around her, not as bodies, but as memories trying to escape. He never returned to his unit. A Sith Lord, proud and loud, attempted to confront her on Belderus. His fortress collapsed inward before he even reached her presence. His students fled. His warriors abandoned the site. Only his final message remained a short, broken recording. She isn't darkness. She is what darkness fears. Words spread faster than truth. Cultists in the Outer Rim began carving her name into obsidian tablets, believing her to be a prophet. They didn't know her. They didn't understand her. But fear does not require understanding. It only requires repetition. And so, her name, repeated. Senators murmured it in private meetings. Generals spoke it behind closed doors. Children whispered it to scare themselves to sleep. Shaar. A name the Jedi had buried. A name the Sith regretted discovering. A name the galaxy now carried like a wound. Her apprentice noticed the shift first. He saw the way people looked at her, not like a woman, not like a warrior, but like a falling star. Beautiful, distant, impossible to survive. He walked behind her through marketplaces, through ruins, through forests that had forgotten their own names. Everywhere they went, silence followed. Whispers filled it. He finally asked her, "Do they know what you are?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know either. The Jedi, unable to deny her any longer, sent out warnings through encrypted channels. Not orders, confessions. Do not face her alone. Do not trust what you see. Do not listen if she speaks. They still refuse to call her a Sith. They refuse to call her anything. Because naming something acknowledges that it belongs in the world. And she didn't. She stood on the threshold of every definition they had built: Jedi, Sith, exile, prophet, and existed outside them. Untouched by doctrine, unbound by the force that shaped the galaxy. So they tried to bury her name again, tried to remove it from archives, tried to silence the survivors, tried to convince the Senate she was a Ruuma. But rumors don't shatter enclaves. Rumors don't break masters. Rumors don't make the force recoil. And in their desperation to hide her, they made her louder. On Coruscant, a young Padawan walked into the council chamber and placed a stone on the floor carved with a word he could not remember carving. Shaar. He had never met her, but he had dreamed of her. When the masters questioned him, he wept until he could no longer speak. The council dismissed him, but the stone remained, because some truths cannot be erased. Some names refuse burial. Some stories claw their way into the light, even when the galaxy begs them to stay hidden. And so, the day the Jedi feared arrived. The day her name became real. Not a whisper, a warning. Prophecies were not rare in the galaxy. Most were ignored, a few were feared, but only one ever went looking for someone. And it found her. It began on Ossus, inside a vault sealed by the Jedi long before the Mandalorian Wars. A repository of dangerous visions, fragments of foresight carved into stone, hidden away so the Order would not lose itself in fear. For centuries, no one opened it, until the walls cracked. Not from battle, from resonance. A wave of sound, the same quiet fracture that followed Shaar across systems, struck the vault like a memory returning too suddenly. And the stone broke, revealing texts the Jedi hoped would never speak again. A Padawan archivist, named Jalen, was the first to enter. He expected dust. He found movement. Not wind, not shadows. Words shifting on ancient tablets, rearranging themselves as if alive. He screamed for help, but no sound left his throat. His eyes burned with visions he couldn't understand, glimpses of worlds that had not yet fallen, and screams from people who had not yet lived. And through it all, a single name: Shaar. He collapsed. He survived, but his mind didn't. When the masters reached him, he clawed at their robes, begging them to erase what he had seen. When they asked him to explain, he uttered only 4 words before losing consciousness. She breaks the Force. When Jalen awoke days later, he could no longer speak. But the prophecy had already spread. The Jedi Council retrieved the tablet that had rewritten itself. It bore a message none of them wished to read. When the wound learns to walk, the Force will divide. Another line formed beneath it slowly, painfully, like the stone resisted being shaped. Not death, not darkness, a truth with no place. The oldest masters debated what it meant. Some believed it referred to the rise of a new Sith Lord. Others thought it might warn of a splintering among the Jedi. But one Master Kylen, who had survived Shaar's presence, once refused to debate. He knew. He brought the tablet forward and whispered, "This is not a warning about the future. It is a record of the present. Because prophecies do not predict what might be. They try to make sense of what already is. And Shaar was not becoming something. She had already become it." The Jedi attempted to hide the prophecy, sealing the tablet inside a vault within a vault. But secrets that begin in fear are never contained for long. Rumors escaped into training halls, war rooms, Senate corridors. A wound that walks. The Force dividing. A truth with no place. Even the Sith felt it through meditation, through failed rituals, through visions that shattered mid-image. Lords who once saw themselves ruling the galaxy suddenly saw only static. Prophecy isn't meant to terrify the powerful, but this one did, because it named something they couldn't destroy. Not with sabers, not with fire, not with armies. Shaar did not know of the prophecy. Not at first, but the Force carried whispers to her anyway. Not as words, as pressure, as a sensation beneath her skin, like the galaxy had taken notice, like something enormous had looked her way for the first time. It wasn't recognition. It was acknowledgement, as if the Force itself now understood what she truly was. Not a Sith, not a Jedi, not a weapon. A conclusion, a point where all the paths that had diverged, light, dark, balance, prophecy, finally collapsed into one truth. A truth that should never have existed. A truth that now walked the galaxy. And when Shaar sensed the shift, the weight of being seen, she did not stop. She did not fear. She only whispered, "Now they begin to understand." She had no throne, no temple, no council, but Darth Shaar had power, and in the galaxy, power always invites betrayal. The warning did not come as a strike. It came as silence. Allies who once reached for her in desperation now offered nothing. Systems she had freed from Jedi oversight turned their eyes away. Her influence had grown too large, too fast, and some feared it would never stop growing. The Sith Lords of the outer sectors, once too distant to care, now spoke her name in meetings. Not with reverence, with calculation. They had no desire to face her in battle, but they knew what unchecked legends could do. Legends become symbols. Symbols become threats, and threats get removed. She sensed it, long before they moved. Because betrayal doesn't arrive. It waits. Inside words not said. Inside glances too still. Inside loyalties stretched too thin. And Shaar, for all her rage, understood one thing perfectly. Those who fear you will never serve you. They will only delay your fall. Her apprentice was the first to turn. The one she had raised through agony. the one she had broken and rebuilt in her own image. He returned to her with hollow eyes and Jedi words in his mouth. Not to convince her, not to plead, to offer her peace. He knelt before her and said, "They promised me you could be spared." She didn't speak, because there was nothing left to say. He tried to ignite his saber. His hand didn't reach it in time. When he fell, she caught him. She whispered nothing, not apology, not anger, just silence. The same silence that had followed her since the day she was born. The betrayal had not hurt her, because it had never left her. It had always been there in the Jedi who refused to see her, in the Sith who refused to name her, in the Force that gave her voice but no place to belong. Every step forward had been built on abandonment. Every victory had cost her something real. And now, what she had left was power. But power cannot mourn. So she burned the outpost he had come from. Not out of rage, not to punish, to erase the lie, to remind the galaxy that Darth Shaar did not negotiate. Not with Jedi, not with traitors, not with the Force itself. But betrayal doesn't stop after the first cut. It spreads. Rumors of her death began to circulate, not because she had fallen but because they hoped she would. Republic warlords claimed she had been consumed by her own rituals. Sith messengers delivered forged reports of her destruction. Jedi masters declared her fate sealed by prophecy. None of it was true, but truth had never protected her. The Jedi hunted her again, this time with names. The Sith moved fleets behind false banners. The Senate issued silent bounties. Not one of them acted alone. Together they conspired, not to defeat her but to bury her again, like they had tried to do when she was a child, like they had done when they denied her place in the Force. But Shaar had learned. She no longer reached for mercy. She no longer listened for understanding. She simply moved, like a fracture across glass. She left systems in quiet ruin, not destroyed, but emptied. She answered Jedi assaults not with weapons, but with memories. She spoke to Sith assassins in voices that belonged to people they had lost. And still, the betrayal grew. Because fear does not end with punishment. It deepens. And in its depth, the galaxy finally realized something terrible. They had not created her. They had revealed her. And in doing so, they had made their own end inevitable. Not through fire, not through war, but through a single truth they could no longer ignore. Darth Shaar was not coming for the galaxy. The galaxy had already come for her, and it was too late to turn back. They came at dawn. Not one faction. All of them. Jedi strike cruisers emerging from hyperspace like falling stars. Sith warships rising from the dark edges of the sector, eager to claim a victory history would remember. Republic artillery carriers positioning themselves in silent lines, their guns already warm. 3 empires united by one purpose: to end her. Shaar stood at the window of her fortress, watching the horizon brighten with enemy fire. There was no surprise in her eyes, only recognition, because this was always going to happen. Power gathers enemies, silence gathers fear, and fear gathers armies. Her fortress was not grand, not ancient, not protected by sorcery or legend. It was a place she chose because no one else wanted it, an abandoned relay station built into the spine of a fractured canyon, where the wind screamed through broken steel and the ground held memories of older wars. She had made it hers, not as a sanctuary, as an ending. Her apprentice was gone. Her enemies were many, and the Force, once uneasy around her, now shivered like a creature sensing its own reflection. The siege began before the sun fully rose. Jedi gunships broke through the clouds, unleashing beams of light that tore at the outer walls. Sith bombers followed, not caring who struck first as long as they struck deep. Republic troopers descended in waves, their boots shaking the metal under her feet. But no one reached the gates. Because the fortress itself resisted. Not with weapons, with resonance. Every shot that hit the structure recoiled with a vibration that tore through the attackers' formations. Troopers staggered, pilots screamed. Jedi lost momentary focus as memories they did not own flashed behind their eyes. Still, they advanced. Still, she waited. She walked through the hall slowly, touching the cold railings, the cracked floors, the terminals she had long ago rendered useless. This place had never been built to withstand the galaxy, but she had changed it, bent it, filled it with the same fracture that lived in her. Outside, the battle grew louder. Inside, everything grew quieter. She reached the center chamber, an empty room with no purpose except the one she gave it. The walls trembled as another barrage struck, sending dust drifting like ash. She glanced upward, sensing the approach of someone powerful. A Jedi Master, no, several, and Sith Lords behind them, competing for the right to claim her fall. They thought this would be triumph. They thought this would be closure. They never understood what she truly was. She stepped into the center of the room, closed her eyes, and listened to the Force, to the wound, to the end already written. The siege would not spare her, but it would not survive her either. The galaxy had come to kill Darth Shaar. None of them would leave unchanged. The walls finally broke at midday. Not from the Jedi, not from the Sith, from the weight of everything converging at once. A Republic cannon struck the western supports with enough force to split the canyon floor. The fortress shuddered, metal screaming as beams tore apart. Dust rolled through the corridors like a storm without wind. But Shaar did not move. She remained in the central chamber, standing alone as the structure around her fractured piece by piece. When the Jedi entered, they did so cautiously, sabers lit, eyes wide, breath shaking. They had trained their entire lives for darkness, but not for absence. A master stepped forward, trying to speak. Shaar lifted her head, and the words died in his throat. Not from fear, from understanding too sudden, too complete. He saw a vision of his own future collapse, the moment where everything he believed would fail him. He staggered. She didn't. The Sith arrived moments later, pushing past the Jedi with pride sharpened into desperation. They ignited their blades like torches in a tomb. One of them shouted her name as if claiming ownership over her fall. She did nothing. Instead, the Force shifted, not in light, not in darkness, in recoil. Like the galaxy itself took one step backward. The chamber floor cracked. The ceiling groaned. Energy surged through the steel bones of the fortress, resonating with the same quiet vibration that had haunted systems for years. The attackers heard it, every faction, every warrior. A sound too heavy to carry, too thin to escape. The Jedi dropped to one knee, clutching their heads. Sith Lords swung blindly at shadows, their visions turning to static. Troopers outside fired at anything that moved, unable to hear their own commanders. And through it all, Shaar stood still. The fortress continued to fall around her, layers of steel collapsing like pages closing in a book that had been read too many times. But the collapse did not touch her. Dust swirled where she stood, bending around her as if refusing to land. She took a single step forward. The vibration deepened. A Jedi behind her screamed not from pain, but from revelation. He saw his own death, decades in the future, in a place he had never visited. A Sith Lord dropped her saber and whispered apologies to ghosts no one else could see. Shaar kept walking. Toward the door, toward the falling world, toward the inevitable end. The attackers pressed forward again, driven by duty, by fear, by pride. None reached her. The resonance pushed them back, subtle but unstoppable, like a tide that refused to let anything come too close. The fortress frame collapsed in full, beams fell, floors folded. Entire wings slid into the canyon below, consumed by fire and shadow. The air filled with the deafening roar of metal dying. But in the center of it all, there was silence. Shaar paused once, looking at the sky breaking open above her. Not in defeat, not in triumph, in acceptance. Because she had always known how this story ended. Not with victory, not with surrender, with a fall no one could witness clearly, and a truth no one could name. The fortress gave one final shudder, and then it fell. When the dust cleared, nothing remained standing. The fortress was gone, reduced to metal bones jutting from the canyon like the ribs of something ancient. Fires burned without sound, swallowing oxygen faster than they produced heat. Shattered beams glowed red as they cooled. Shards of stone drifted like ash caught in a breeze that did not exist. The Jedi searched first. Not for victory, for answers. They climbed through debris, stepping over collapsed platforms and melted consoles, calling out with voices that trembled. Some reached into the Force, hoping for a presence, a signature, anything. They felt nothing, and feeling nothing terrified them. Bodies were found, Sith warriors crushed under steel, Republic troopers buried beneath burning wreckage. Even 2 Jedi Masters lay still, their faces frozen in expressions that resembled sorrow more than pain. But there was no sign of her, no trace, no scorch mark, no fragment of clothing, bone, or blood. A Sith Lord declared loudly that she must have been vaporized. A Jedi countered that she must have ascended into some deeper void. A Republic officer quietly suggested her body had simply fallen into the canyon. None of them believed themselves, because the Force did not respond, not with grief, not with release, not with closure, only with silence. And silence had always been her language. The apprentice, once hers, then lost to fear, arrived last. He pushed past soldiers and masters alike, searching the ruins with frantic hands, bleeding as he tore through heated steel. He called her name, voice breaking each time it echoed back at him. He found a piece of the central chamber wall, half buried, still vibrating faintly, like a dying heartbeat. He pressed his ear against it, and heard nothing. He collapsed beside it, tears slipping down his face, not for her death, but for the possibility she had not died at all, that she had left him a second time, that she had vanished into the same silence she'd carried through the galaxy. He wasn't alone. Rumors spread fast. Some claimed they saw a figure walking away from the canyon before the fires reached their peak. Others swore they felt a presence step across their thoughts, soft as breath, cold as memory. A Mandalorian scout reported seeing footprints that led into the desert and then simply stopped. The Force itself wavered in those hours. Not violently, not visibly, but with a hesitation, as if something once blocking its path had moved. Jedi Masters meditated for answers and found none. Sith oracles searched their rituals and returned pale and silent. The Senate demanded confirmation of her death, but no report offered certainty. Because death leaves traces, this left absence, and absence does not behave like an ending. By nightfall, the surviving factions retreated. The canyon was left behind, burning quietly beneath a starless sky. Wind finally reached the ruins, carrying heat into the darkness. The apprentice remained the longest. He stood at the edge, looking down into the fire-lit void where she should have been. His voice cracked as he whispered, "If you're gone, why does it still feel like you're watching?" The canyon answered only with silence. The same silence she was born into. The same silence she carried. The same silence she left behind. Years passed. New wars came. New Sith rose. The Jedi rebuilt what they could. Names changed. Borders shifted. But some things didn't fade. Some wounds stay open. In the outer rim, on a moon with no name, a Jedi Knight once reported hearing a voice in her dreams. She claimed it spoke truths no one should know, secrets about her master's death, the future of her Padawan, and the betrayal waiting in her own heart. The council dismissed her. She was found weeping in the desert weeks later, whispering the same phrase. She never died. In the deep core, an ancient vault sealed by the Jedi Order cracked open for the first time in centuries. Inside, among decayed manuscripts and lost scrolls, was a hollow record never catalogued, just static. And beneath it, a single voice, not shouting, not chanting, just speaking, soft, cold, measured. The archivist who listened to it retired the same day. He told no one why. Even the Sith felt it. A lord of the new Sith Empire, powerful, untouchable, once disappeared after visiting a ruin beneath a collapsed canyon. His last words, recorded through a remote probe, were simple. "I hear her." In time, her name became something else. Not a warning, not a legend, a silence in the Force. An empty place that should not exist, yet did. Masters avoided it. Apprentices dreamed of it. Some believed it was where the dark side went when it could no longer scream. Others said it was where the light hid when it could no longer shine. But none spoke her name. Because names summon memory, and memory summons presence. And presence, when it is hers, does not stay quiet. There were sightings, always from a distance. A figure standing at the edge of an eclipse. A shadow watching a Jedi temple from a hilltop no one could reach. A whisper heard just before a battle turns. Those who chased her never found her. Those who ignored her never forgot her. And those who believed she was dead stopped believing. Because death closes stories. But hers never ended. The apprentice, now an old man, never took another student. He wandered from system to system, not in exile, but in search. Not for her, but for the proof that she had truly left. He never found it. He died quietly on a transport ship bound for the mid-rim, clutching an old shard of her fortress wall. The crew buried him in space. The shard dissolved in the airlock minutes later. Across the galaxy, Force sensitives still feel it. That pressure, that hum beneath silence, that pause between thoughts. They say it's the dark side. They say it's nothing. But when they listen closely, when they truly open themselves, they hear her, not clearly, not with words, but with certainty. She is not gone. She is not resting. She is not waiting. She is watching. From a fracture in the Force that never healed. From a shadow that was never cast. From the silence she became, and the whisper that never ended.